Rainbow Six Siege 2, a concept that the Siege community has thought of for years and many feel should be prioritized to fix the litany of issues present in the original. And with rumors floating around the community about a Rainbow Six Siege 2 being in development, I figured now was the perfect time to imagine what a Rainbow Six 2 would look like, and whether or not it's even a possibility in the first place. This will not be a video discussing or talking about leaks in any way, because A, most leakers are untrustworthy and are likely just trying to capitalize on this new rumor the community has spun up, and B, I think leaks are a toxin to pretty much every gaming community because they leave players with unrealistic expectations. What I will be covering in this video is the potential pros of a Siege 2 being released, the potential cons that come along with it, what I'd like to see from a Siege 2, and then finally the likelihood that one will even exist in the future. So let's go ahead and get into the video. Also, please subscribe because I'm trying to hit 50K. Now, there are obviously many pros to a Rainbow Six Siege 2. It's why so many people want it to happen, and it's also why this rumor has become so popular. And I think one of the first and biggest reasons why Rainbow Six Siege 2 would have good benefits to the game is that it would bring massive hype and huge marketing dollars back into the game. This is a good thing for obvious reasons. This would happen because with any new game, developers have to spend money to market the game to hopefully produce hype around it. And since Ubisoft would be focusing on remarketing the game to a new audience or some of the players that had left in the past, this would likely end up causing a huge player count spike, which would obviously benefit all of us in the community tremendously. It would mean quicker matchmaking times, it would mean more eyes on Rainbow Six Siege content, and it would also likely drive more viewership to the game's Pro League as well. And I think a Rainbow Six Siege 2 would be extremely effective at this because of how many people and content creators have left the game in the past. If they see that Rainbow Six Siege is reinventing itself and it also starts getting marketed more heavily as a new title, a lot of players might come back just to give it a try and see if it's improved since the last time they've played. Also, another reason why a lot of people like to see a Rainbow Six Siege 2 come out is because the game would be on a new engine, which would make it easier for Ubisoft to put out more new content, and would also likely help Ubisoft make less buggy content, so that way new season launches aren't full of bugs on release. Obviously, this is complete speculation because none of us are developers, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Also, because of the game being on a new engine, most of the major bugs that are in the game currently and most of the glitches that are in the game currently would likely be patched out, since the game's being reprogrammed from the ground up, which has a lot of potential. Siege has a lot of bugs, as you all know, and so a new engine could legitimately bring a lot of new stability to the game that wouldn't be there without it. Also, a fifth major pro of a potential sequel to Rainbow Six Siege is the fact that it would give Ubisoft the opportunity to make huge balancing decisions and quality of life changes all at once. For example, a common thing that many players in the community have been wanting for a very long time is the removal of the one-shot headshot mechanic. Ubisoft could do that with a Rainbow Six Siege 2. Since it's a brand new title, they don't have to necessarily stick with the same core gameplay mechanics. Now, I'm not saying I would support something like removing one-shot headshot, but it's just an example of what Ubisoft could do with a Rainbow Six Siege 2. It would also give them the opportunity to go back to some of the older operators that they aren't happy with and completely reworking them, giving them new gadgets, and it would also give them the opportunity to introduce a ton of new guns to the game as well. It would also allow Ubisoft to go back to the drawing board and address some of the major issues with the game, like the fact that Siege is super defender-sided right now. Ubisoft could nerf a ton of defending operators, or they could buff a ton of attackers all at once in preparation for the rollout of Rainbow Six Siege 2. There's so much potential with the balancing and the quality of life changes to the point where I really do think that this would be one of the best parts about a Rainbow Six Siege 2. But on top of that, they could also probably add a lot of new content to the game before it released. For example, they could add new maps to the game or rework maps that they aren't happy with. They could implement new operators to the game to help fill out the roster. Or what I would like to see is them replace old content with new stuff. For example, Ubisoft might notice that Jaeger and Wamai are super important operators for the defense, and basically every lineup requires them. So they could instead implement some sort of secondary gadget that replaces Jaeger and Wamai, and then they could just replace those two operators with someone else, or they could give them a new gadget. That's just an example, but there's plenty more opportunity that Ubisoft could have with a Rainbow Six Siege 2, since they'd have a lot more time to work out the content before it released. Also, the final pro that I could think of for a Rainbow Six Siege 2 is that it would allow Ubisoft the time and the resources potentially to work on a new anti-cheat for the game. This is probably the biggest reason why a lot of content creators are pro the Rainbow Six Siege 2 idea, because the cheating situation right now is completely out of hand, and it basically makes games unplayable at the higher ranks. But even in the lower ranks and in quick match and standard, cheaters are still running rampant and basically ruining everyone's experience. So if there was ever a time for Ubisoft to start putting their resources towards a Rainbow Six Siege 2 and towards an anti-cheat, it would be right now. Whether Ubisoft would be successful in developing a a new anti-cheat for a Rainbow Six Siege 2 is completely hypothetical. We'd have no idea, but it would still give them the opportunity to take a shot at it. Now, there's less cons for a Rainbow Six Siege 2, but I do think they are worth noting because they could have drastic effects on the game's future. Firstly, and arguably the biggest con to a Rainbow Six Siege 2 is the monetization aspect. Ubisoft would have to get the money to fund a project like this from somewhere. They'd either have to make the price of the game high again, basically making it $60 like it was on launch, or they have to make Siege 2 free to play, with even heavier monetization on cosmetics. And before you say that's not a guarantee, if you look at other games that went free to play like Overwatch, it had a massive effect on the game's monetization, and it made cosmetics in the game extremely expensive, and it made it basically impossible to get those cosmetics for free. This isn't a guarantee, but I do think there is a high likelihood of, if a Rainbow Six Siege 2 was to occur, the monetization in the game would likely increase, and it would also likely end up rubbing a lot of the current fan base the wrong way. Also, another risk with the monetization of a Rainbow Six Siege 2 is that if they did decide to go free to play, which seems to be the most popular opinion amongst fans right now, it could make cheating a whole lot worse, since cheaters would just be able to make multiple accounts for free and load into matches easily. They would no longer have to pay any money at all. Also, another con to our Rainbow Six 2 is the fact that it would be a huge risk to the game. Once again, if you look at games like CSGO or Overwatch, who both had sequels, they were both received extremely poorly on launch, and both of them ended up tarnishing the reputation of the developers permanently. And also in CSGO's 2's case, it's been slowly draining players over time, and its player count is actually worse than it was in the original CSGO. This means that if Ubisoft makes any major mistakes in the rollout for the Siege 2, like for example releasing it in an extremely buggy state, or releasing it with overbearing monetization like I mentioned earlier, or releasing it with too little new content or changes, it could end up causing the game to be in a worse state because players would start leaving after feeling betrayed and used by Ubisoft. And it would also likely end up stopping players that would have played Siege from playing it, since the game would potentially get a lot of bad publicity. Obviously, whether this would actually happen or not is up to Ubisoft, and I honestly think that if Ubisoft played it safe here, that likely wouldn't have to deal with the huge backlash to CSGO and Overwatch got, but it's still a risk that's on the table. And speaking of that, another huge con to a Siege 2 is that there's a huge stigma around sequels right now. Because of those games that I mentioned, Overwatch and CSGO, Siege 2 will likely receive a lot of hate or skepticism before it's even released, because a lot of people will see that 2 at the end of the name and just assume it's going to end up like CSGO 2 or Overwatch 2, which is why I think if Ubisoft just did a massive anniversary update instead of a brand new title, it could potentially have bigger benefits to the game without the drawbacks of a sequel. Another huge con of a sequel is the fact that bugs could be really bad on launch, because while a new engine does mean the potential for a lot of old bugs disappearing, it also means that new bugs could appear. And if you look at the previous sequels we've been discussing, they are typically buggy on launch. CSGO had a lot of bugs and glitches on launch, and it didn't feel stable at all. The performance was absolutely horrible. And similar reports were made about Overwatch in the super early stages of its rollout, which is a huge problem. And with most sequels getting way better graphics due to them being coded on a brand new engine, it could end up causing performance to worsen on older systems, and it could also end up causing instability in the game as a whole. And this is what a lot of people don't consider when they discuss Siege 2 and the potential of the game on a new engine. The new engine could be good for the game, but it also could be a curse. It just all depends on how Ubisoft rolled it out and how long Ubisoft let the game cook in the oven. Because if they just rushed the game out for the sake of getting it out, Siege could end up in a worse state after Siege 2 than it was before the sequel was released. Also, another potential risk of a Rainbow Six Siege 2 is that if Ubisoft makes a lot of sweeping changes, like I discussed in the pros, but they aren't supported by a large majority of the community, then they could end up pushing a lot of people away from the game. And they could end up in a situation where most people would rather play the original than the sequel, like in Overwatch and Counter-Strike situation, which obviously isn't a good thing. However, none of these pros or cons even matter if the likelihood of a sequel even coming out is low. And despite what the rumors say, I do think there is a high likelihood that a Siege 2 isn't in development. And in my opinion, it could honestly never come out. The creative director of Rainbow Six Siege has said before that they likely will never make a Rainbow Six Siege 2 because of other games not having successful sequels. And statements like that have been made as recently as just a few months ago. So the likelihood that Ubisoft would just go back on their statements like that quickly is pretty slim. But removing that as even a part of the discussion, you have to keep in mind that for Ubisoft to do a Siege 2, the budget for Siege would have to increase substantially, and they would have to take a lot of manpower away from the original game. This is the main reason why I don't think a Siege 2 will happen at any point in the near future, because that's an expensive endeavor. I think the game getting slower when it comes to releasing new content is likely why people believe the Siege 2 rumor so heavily, since the past few years have been so slow for content. A lot of people right now are just desperate for an explanation as to why Ubisoft isn't fixing things quick enough, and as to why there's not enough enough content. And you also have to keep in mind that this isn't a new idea. Back in the year 4 and year 5 time period, when content was starting to ramp down again, a lot of players expected Ubisoft was working on a Siege 2, and rumors were spreading around the community at the time. Trust me, I was playing and I remember those rumors spreading. But it turned out that Ubisoft was actually developing R6 Extraction and they weren't working on Rainbow Six Siege 2 at all. So Ubisoft could have had some of the Siege dev team move on to other projects. You just never know. So just keep your expectations low, because I really do think that the likelihood of a Siege 2 actually happening is rare. But if it does happen, despite the cons that I mentioned throughout this video, I do think it would be an overall positive. The massive potential that the game would have on a new engine is worth it in my opinion, because we could potentially finally see a new anti-cheat, we could see the game in a more stable state, and we could see a lot of new content and major balancing decisions being made by Ubisoft, which could potentially push the game in the right direction. Whether any of this will actually happen or not is a different story. We'll just have to wait and see. But I'm hoping, just like many of you, that the rumors are right, because Siege desperately needs something to turn the tides around. Anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, I make Siege content just like this twice a week, so go subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitter if you don't want to miss the next upload. If you want to watch another video just like this one, I'll be popping up on your screen right now that I'm sure you all enjoy. I'll see you next time, friends, and peace.